The Personality Profile Friday features a thorough academic. I mean, I have his CV before me, it's 16 pages. And I'm sure even with that, there's an attempt to summarize some of the matters in there. We otherwise would have ended up with a mini book of a sort on this one. He'll be telling us a lot about himself, what he makes of what current happenings in Ghana. His area particularly will be security matters and conflict resolution. And of course, in those areas, they always tell us how to also prevent or manage conflict when it arises so it does not escalate into a situation that gets out of everybody's hands. And we'll be dealing with those matters as well. Dr. Kwesi Aning is my guest tonight. It's great to have you, Doc.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. We've been in contact with each other for a very long time.
I know. We did our first interview 13 years ago.
13 years ago, yeah.
That's a very long time.
That's a very long time, yeah.
You're married with 2 children. I'm beginning from a very unusual end. Who are your children?
Well, I don't think it's that unusual. I'm a family man. I love my family. I have 2 kids. Kweku, who is studying at Nottingham University.
Okay.
19 years, studying international security. And global security, so I mean he didn't fall too far from from the tree.
That's right.
My daughter Ekua, who goes to Royal Bath High School, it's a public girls' school, also in the UK.
Okay, by unusual, all I meant is that it's an unusual first question on Personality Profile
Well, I
Friday.
think for me, those who know me very well know that the family is the center of my life.
Okay. Okay.
And therefore, I think, although you thought it was unusual, I think for me it's very crucial and critical.
Great. So who's your wife?
My wife is Regina. She's called Regina. Went to Holy Child. We married 27 years ago.
I see.
I saw her in a flash. Somebody had sent her to bring me a letter when I was a much younger, slimmer, non-pot-bellied man at the University of Ghana completing history. And I guess we fell in love immediately. And I then went into exile a couple of months after that and sent my mother and my uncle to go and do the proper thing, and we've been married since then.
For 27 years?
For 27 years, yeah.
She was a student in the university as well?
No, she had actually completed and was teaching French at St. Augustine's. Let me also hasten to add.
Yes.
She never managed to teach me French.
That's interesting. Never managed to teach you French. I probably should get her to do that because you speak 2 languages, don't you?
I speak
international languages, I mean.
Yeah.
And that does not include French?
That doesn't include French. I speak Danish and Norwegian and can speak or understand some Swedish also.
Okay, because of the Scandinavian connection.
Yeah, because of the Scandinavian connection.
You lived there for some time. I see. So 27 years of marriage, really? Wow, with 2 children. Your firstborn is 19, you say.
Yeah.
What's marriage been like for you?
No, I always tell people that I've been quite lucky with the women in my life. I mean, my mother, who laid the foundation, strong Christian and an educationist. My wife, French school teacher, now a child psychologist and child educator herself. She's been my fiercest critic and my strongest supporter.
Right.
You know, so the 27 years I've been, as I always tell people, one of cooperation and conflict.
I like that.
Because sometimes as men we tend to resist very sensible, commonsensical advice. But I think as you grow much older, you tend to calm down and realize that for women, the centrality of their advice and their engagement is about the family and the family survival and their ability to grow and prosper. So I think as I've grown, I've now learned the virtues of moderated speech, number 1, and also to calm down and listen to advice much, much better, and I think it's beginning to help.
So you were born in 1962.
Yeah.
It should make you 50 years.
Yeah.
And you've been married for 27 years, more than half your age.
Yeah.
You got married at a very young age.
I got married
by Ghanaian standards, 23.
I mean, a terribly young age, but also, I mean, having seen the girl for just a couple of days. Yeah, basically, yeah. Wow. So that was a leap of faith. And I think it's worked primarily because both of us have been honest with each other. And in terms of the honesty, it's been honesty about the money. Okay. It's been honesty about the determination and our dreams. And it's been a collaborative, shared process. So although, I mean, Regina lives in the UK now with the children, hopefully she'll come back and join me by the end of the year or early next year. Okay. We speak like 10 times a day. Oh, wow. We send about 20 text messages. She knows to the last 5 to 10 minutes where I am every single time.
Wow.
I provide the information, she provides me hers.
That's delayed GPS.
Yes, delayed GPS. But you see, that builds trust.
Right.
Because if I'm in a meeting and she calls for X number of times and I don't pick it up, naturally you'll be worried. And of course, knowing all the stories people tell also. So I think it's always important for your partner, and in my case, for Regina to know where I am at every one time, and for me to know wherever she is. So, I mean, I think it's doable.
Okay.
I think it's been successful, partly also because I've got a very strong family support. She has also.
Oh, right.
My brothers-in-laws are my friends. My siblings are her friends, you know, so we've got this support framework that allows us to deal with our problems and our challenges in an open, transparent, supportive manner.
That's great. I didn't get the names of your children, though.
Kweku and Ekua.
Kweku and Ekua.
Yeah. Okay,
and is there any sign what Ekua is going to become?
Ekua has already got 2 poems published in anthology. She's 13. She wants to be a writer of children's books. Wow. And an illustrator of children's books. So we've been very careful in selecting the school that we sent her to, her boarding school. That is a school of the Queen's Trust that seeks to bring the specific talents that young girls have. So that school focuses quite a lot on painting. Ekwa is a great painter and artist, and that tries to use their imaginary skills in ways that the girls themselves want. So, I mean, we have always, probably because of our Scandinavian experience, sought to give our children free hands. Okay. You know, so our son started with a philosophy, which I thought was great because it would have given him a very broad background. But then I think he thought, okay.
My first degree minor was in philosophy.
Oh, great.
It's a great thing.
So I think I'll get Kweku to write to
you. So we can talk about that. Yeah. But you mentioned exile.
Yeah.
And that must have been in your 20s as well, because if you're talking about having...
I mean, I first went to exile in 1983 when I had just gone to the University of Ghana. And the Major Aluta, I think, was first.
You were 21?
Yeah. In November 1982, actually, I was 20.
Okay.
I mean, we had just entered the University of Ghana, and the first Major Aluta was in November 82. Then the extremely violent ones in which people lost lives and people were maimed happened, I think, in April 1983.
So this is early days PNDC.
Very early days PNDC, post the immediate, I think, murder of the judges. That was what was the trigger. Okay. Arthur Kennedy then was a fiery student leader.
I see.
But I mean, it wasn't just a matter of students getting out onto the streets. Part of the success and survival of the revolution was that as students, we bought into the ideas of the revolution about equality, about putting our education at the service of this country, and therefore went into the countryside, you know, to teach basic hygiene, to clear gutters, to help with basic construction. And I still go to my father's town, and people tell me, that you contributed in building that bus stop. And I have quite a number of those experiences are gone.
I see.
But one of the things that I always want to share with people when I talk about my own political experiences and my exile, first, is the need for Ghanaians to be tolerant of those who come here.
Okay.
I think there's an intolerance in this country for refugees and those who are seeking our support and our help. Precisely because I think that I have benefited immensely, and that is the second point, from being in exile. It allowed me to experience new cultures and to have advanced degrees and all paid for. And I've now come back with those skill sets to help build my country. So I think we've got to be a bit more tolerant and considerate of those who are in need who come here.
So what took you to exile? What was the reason and where did you go?
First, I was in the UK after the post-1982 one. The 1983 one, I had...
Why did you have to go to the UK? Why did you have to go to the UK at 21 as a student? You supported the revolution, as you say at the beginning. You believed in its principles. Yeah. Why should you leave Ghana?
Well, every revolution tends to eat its children. And by November 82, the tensions between the revolutionary ideals or the way they were being translated was beginning to rub quite badly on the student leadership and what we perceived revolutions ought to do. So the first major alluta in November 82 led to a very brutal response then from the Workers' Defense Committees and from the People's Defense Committees, who attacked us, ruined quite a number of the students' rooms, beat people mercilessly up. And I mean, the personal threats that some of us had meant that we thought it was fairly sensible to take a step out of town. But of course, post that, there were attempts at reconciliation and at getting people to say that, look, these are excesses, so let's come back. But if you remember, it didn't take too long for the murder of the judges and the ex-retired military officer. That then flared up the tensions that had become latent. I was arrested just opposite Daily Graphic, where we had been cornered by a couple of troops and shots were fired. A dignified lady then pulled me into her office across a set of office buildings across the Graphic Road, hid me in her office. Unfortunately, a WDC member had seen her do that. What I remember is that whilst I was being battered and thrown at the back of a police jeep, she was also being brutally beaten. I'm just hoping and praying. I've been looking for her since I came back. I don't know her name. I can't even describe her. But if she's alive and listens to this program, probably to contact me for me to say thank you for saving my life. I was then taken to the police headquarters and terribly beaten over several days. Wrote a long statement. It was clear that we were supposed to be put on trial. Well, those of us who had been arrested were supposed to be put on trial. I thought that the beating that I had gone through, I just did not trust the justice system or the revolutionary justice system and decided to leave. And I left Ghana, yes.
How many years were you away for?
For about 18 years.
18 years?
Yeah, 16 to 18 years, yeah.
So you had just met your wife,
yeah,
to be.
Yeah.
In your absence, the proper thing, as you put it,
yeah,
was done.
Yeah.
Customary marriage and all of that.
Yeah.
So did she join you?
Yeah, she joined me in Denmark, yeah.
In Denmark?
In Denmark.
So that's what took you to Denmark?
Yeah, that's what took me to Denmark, yeah.
But you still completed your degree, your first degree?
No, we had just completed.
You had just completed.
Yeah,
so that was your
yeah,
BA honors in history?
In history, yeah.
As a major?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you went to Denmark and you started an MPhil program?
Yeah.
In 1990. So you completed in 86?
Yeah, 86, yeah.
What happened in that 4-year period?
Well, in the 4-year period, I got asylum very quickly. I learned Danish very quickly. And actually did migrant politics. Served on the Migrant Council to the Danish government and was an advisor to the Interior Minister for 4 or 5 years on migrant policy and on refugee policy. Eventually rose to become the head of refugee policy in Denmark.
Okay.
But even more interesting is not my work with refugees, but that I formed a band.
Oh, you did?
My childhood dream was to become a rock drummer, play drums in a rock band.
I see.
Of course, my father, as a conservative Presbyterian, was not too happy. So once I did this politics, also formed a band called the Warriors, or some merriment that toured the whole of Scandinavia and parts of northern Germany. Yeah.
And you were the drummer?
Yeah, I was a drummer. I played a set of phantom from St. Palugo drums. I had a bit of a Rastafarian hair.
Oh, really? You should have brought me some photos.
Well, that's why I was pushing very hard. I actually made an effort to bring those.
No, she'll put in some photos, I'm sure, and viewers will see that.
Play some phantom from drums and stuff like that. So, I mean, those were great days, but then I decided to go back to school.
Okay.
Because I thought, well, I mean, it's great fun, but I think.
Okay. Yeah. So for your MPhil, what did you study? University of Copenhagen?
Yeah, I did history.
Okay.
And wrote a dissertation on the strategies of non-alignment.
Okay.
Looking at how Nkrumah used non-alignment as a lever, first to get the financing for the Akosombo Dam, how he used non-alignment as an argument to build, try to develop the Organization of African Unity. And then the third test case was was on, I don't really remember, but
Okay.
it was on employment strategies and non-alignment.
Okay, and so what's the can't fail thing that I see?
The can't fail is just philosophy as a candidate.
Oh.
But I mean, that's real. If you translate, it
Okay.
becomes an MPhil.
And so you just pursued that and did your PhD as well from the same
Post the can't fail, I went back and did a bit of migrant politics again.
Oh. Okay, that's a whole 8-year period.
Yeah, that's the whole issue.
So, of course, the Kofi Annan Center is something we have to mention. He's a dean, right? And he's a director as well. Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Center, I believe we call it. Training Center. Yeah. That's right. And he's a dean and director. We'll get to touch on that quite a bit. But we're talking about 90. So you did your master's in 90. Over an 8-year period, your PhD. That was quite long, wasn't it?
No, the first 5 years post my master's, I went back to doing migrant politics. I actually was then employed by the Ministry of Health to do a little bit of HIV/AIDS related information for migrants in Denmark. Wow. That afforded me the opportunity to travel all over the country, talking to migrant groups that could not be captured by both the formal education and health ministries. Denmark is a very homogeneous country. Minorities form just about 4.5%, of which 90% of these guys come from Turkey. They came as migrant workers. So the Muslim population is quite huge. Most of them come from extremely conservative backgrounds, and therefore were reluctant for their daughters to go to school. There's a bit of female genital mutilation, particularly from the Somali side. So the Ministry of Health and Education thought that, look, the message could best be sent and the tough talk done by someone who also comes from a similar background. So I did a bit of that and then continued to advise the Minister of the Interior on general migration policy. So in 1995, decided that, look, it was time to go back to school to do a PhD. So.
And as you said, it was all paid for, both your master's degree and PhD.
Yeah.
By who?
By the Danish state.
Wow.
And for me, that is where the generosity and far-sighted, informed policy making with respect to refugees and people in need comes in. That if you look at the Danish state and the investment into refugees and migrants as a whole, the spin-offs to the Danish state are massive. And I think that is what a country like Ghana must begin to do. How do we ensure that those who come in here can be given a fair opportunity and a fair chance, for us to, let me be very brutal here, exploit the skill sets that they've brought from their countries. You see, because to become a refugee is those who are strong, who are driven by the desire to succeed and to move on. So refugees come into multiple countries with skill sets, and I think we need to find out how to use those skill sets for our own benefit.
You are quite the polyglot, so to speak. You have a number of things in you. I mean, refugee, music, drumming, dancing, teaching, academia, and your work experience. I mean, there's no way I can go through this whole CV. It's not possible. The only thing is that I'm picking this style. Next time I have to draw a CV, because I think it's quite clear to me. It shows, what you have to do. Work experience, Department of Peace Studies in Cape Coast University, University of Pretoria, South Africa, University of Sierra Leone Peace and Conflict Studies, there's New York University, that's NYU, non-resident fellow Center of International Cooperation, that's only in 2008. And then, of course, Director Research Department, Kofi Annan, KAIPTC, Accra, right here. There's Addis Ababa, Ethiopia Policy and Counterterrorism. Then there's a Hague Academy of International Law. There's a Center for Security Studies here in Accra. And then there's LESIA, which now I'm told is LESIAD.
LESIAD,
And then there's Austria, European Peace University. I won't try to pronounce the start sliding. Okay, I did a good job.
You did a very good job.
The Institute of Economic Affairs, that's when we first did our interview around that time.
We first met.
Absolutely. There's Pretoria, South Africa, Center for African Studies, University of Copenhagen, Center for Development Research, London School of Economics and Political Science, LSE, Department of Political Science, Copenhagen, Denmark, National War College, Abuja, Nigeria. I mean, it's a very tall list, and that's just 1.5 pages of this CV. Non-academic positions, we can't even begin to mention it. Conflict prevention, a global agenda council, like World Economic Forum, oversight services, UN mission in Liberia. I'm taking a bit of time, but I just want the viewers to get what the kind of person we are speaking to. Senior consultant, UN Office for Drugs and Crime, leader, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Division of Peace and Security Directorate, African Union, the team to evaluate 5 South African think tanks. You're a member of the Swedish International Development Agency, senior consultant, Intergovernmental Action Group, and Money Laundering and Crime in West Africa, senior consultant, Intergovernmental Action Group against Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing in West Africa, senior consultant to the Under Secretary General of the UN Department of Political Affairs, Secretariat in New York, team leader on assessing terrorism and prevention branch of the UN, Office on Drugs and Crimes, Counter-Terrorism Training Policies to Burkina Faso, Congo, Central African Republic, and Djibouti. I mean, Doc, if I'm to go on, I'm sure we'll take the whole show talking about
yeah, so let's not take the whole
UN team on assessing conflicts in Ghana, project on economic agenda and civil wars, Maputo's Mozambique, African Regional Expert Group, International Commission on Intervention and State Sovereignty. There's African Expert Group on assessment of UN Brahimi reports in South Africa, and just that's that. And then we have teaching experience. University of Ghana, there's Lesia, there's Armed Forces Command and Staff College, there's political science in Denmark, there's political science in Aarhus University in Denmark, different from Copenhagen in Denmark. A lot of writings, dissertation, chapter contributions to books. I can't go through all of that, but then just to give people an idea, then there are the monographs here that we can talk about, articles and referrals in journals, many, and all of that. Book reviews, a lot, invited lectures and papers at major conferences all around the world, selected awards and all of that, membership of editorial boards, international boards. I mean, what really will make a man want to do this in 50 years of his life? And perhaps in the last 25 or even less of it, because a lot of it is quite recent.
Yeah.
Why would you want to do all of this?
Well, I think I'm driven by one thing, basically. That if you don't tell your own story, people will tell it for you and tell the way it's used themselves.
Perfect.
That is my bottom line.
Wow.
Nobody understands the fear I have of armed robbery if I don't talk about armed robbery, nor write about it myself. Nobody understands my hopes and aspirations for the successes of Ghanaian democracy if I don't write about it myself. And I think it's important that we begin to, you see, knowledge generation is politics and power play.
Okay. Right.
And I think African scholars must learn to write and stop saying, I've got a PhD, and therefore our names must get lost.
Okay. All right.
No. A PhD is basically a stepping stone to generating knowledge. Bottom line. And if we understand that generating that knowledge is not purely altruistic, but that it is political and a power game, I think it's crucial and critical that as we stand before our classes teaching particular subject matter or topics, that first, we ourselves have contributed to that topic, that two, we know the Africans who have contributed to that topic, and that the others become the third, fourth tier.
Okay.
I'm saying this because when you take any issue at all, say humanitarian intervention,
yes,
African conceptions and understandings of humanitarian intervention are totally different from, say, the European Union or the United States. Let me give you 2 classic examples.
Okay.
One is on Libya. Certainly the African Union, and if it had shown leadership, would have responded to the challenges of Libya in a different way than the UN-sanctioned NATO bombing. 2, the African Union and ECOWAS would have responded and dealt with the Ivorian crisis in a considerably different way than France and the UN did. And I think part of the challenge there is that most of our political leaders don't have that self-confidence that African scholarship is good scholarship. Until that scholarship is sent somewhere else and it comes via a circuitous route, right, it is almost impossible, possibly with the exception of South Africa, where their own scholarly institutions are seen as a bulwark and a contributor to the government policy formulation process.
Okay.
I think Ghana, we are beginning to get there.
Okay.
I mean, SEPA is a veritable force.
Right.
Our own former institution, the IEA, is.
Right.
My former institution, African Security Dialogue and Research,
right.
if it was in existence, would definitely have been a force to reckon with. Third World Network is. Several years ago, the Foundation for Security and Development is. And right now, there's absolutely no doubt that the KIPTC is seen as a force to reckon with.
Sure.
But you see, there is that contentious relationship between knowledge generation and African governments. That more often than not, a critical discourse in which you tend to engage. Of course, let me not forget Imani Ghana.
Okay,
world class.
Franklin Kujo,
yes,
Simons,
world class young people putting, policy in the public domain, ensuring that whatever suggestions they make are buttressed by solid, careful, scholarly analysis, sober conclusions. But I mean, you can see the spin-offs that come whenever they write something that one party does not like.
Right.
The trick is to stay the course. Okay? Driven by scholarly honesty and a professional integrity that says, this is what the data shows. These are the options that I think I can put on the table.
What is it that has contributed to this mindset that you have and all that you have been able to do for yourself? And I believe you will do more. Is it in your background? Is it in your upbringing? Is it in the fact of the exile? Is it in what you saw in Ghana? Why conflict resolution in particular? Why security matters? What is it that God gave you that kind of, that kind of disposition, as it were, to go that way?
Well, I think the shift from history to political science was really purely happenstance. My real interest in history was in 16th, 17th century Fanti history. You see, people make a lot of talk about Yasantua, but probably there's a much greater woman in this country, historically, called Igwaba Brafo. One of the few women, or the first one actually to have defeated the British on the coast.
I see. Maybe the Fantis didn't tell the story well enough, as you said. If you
probably
tell the whole story.
And then they have also written about it.
Absolutely.
But if you read the original documents, this great woman broke Fanti traditional law, took over the queenship, led troops to the shore, which was against Fanti tradition, and engaged and defeated the British.
Wow.
Now, my former history professor, the late Professor Edu, fantastic scholar, great teacher, had instilled in me this love for history. So after my history can't fill in Copenhagen, wanted to do a PhD in Fanti diplomacy in the 16th and 17th century.
Wow.
Unfortunately, there was nobody to supervise.
I was going to ask you that.
So,
and here you were out of the country.
Out of town, and couldn't come back though. So met an old friend, and over several years, decided, look, I've got to get this thing out of the way.
Okay.
So he then said, look, why don't you do political science?
Okay.
And at that time, I had this aversion to political scientists for their non-historical or ahistorical approach to their work. Then Professor Rojali said, look, if you can get the empirical side right, I'll take you through the theory.
Okay.
So I had to go through basically learning a host of political science theories.
Right.
And trying to choose which ones I will settle on.
Okay.
So eventually settled on regime theory because I thought issues of norms, values, decision-making processes were useful to the empirical case that I wanted to study, the ECOWAS intervention in Liberia. So that is how I came to political science.
I see. But where did you start school?
Well, I was born at Esamankase. My parents are teachers. Then we moved.
Are they alive?
Yes. Both parents are alive.
Oh,
yes.
I see. Who's your dad and who's your mom?
How old are they? Mom is now 78.
Oh.
Dad, I think, is 80. I'm not too sure. Mom went to Wesley Girls.
Oh, wow, I see.
Went to Wesley College. Dad went to Fansum School. Went to Wesley College also. Came to the University of Ghana. Mom rose to be a director of education. At a point in time, we told her to retire and rest. So she's a sprightly 78-year-old woman.
Wow.
Who reads the same books as I do,
Wow.
the fiction.
I see.
My dad is still very sprightly, dresses considerably better than I do.
Oh, I see.
Reads all my articles, and occasionally we engage. Not so much the substance. He's an English literature and English expert.
Okay.
So thinks the language must be made more friendly, reader friendly. But that is still alive.
Okay.
You know, so we have a good relationship. I don't see him that often as I see my mom. Mom and I eat sometimes thrice, 4 times a week. I think she's one of my favorite fans in terms of my cooking.
Oh, wow.
So on Mother's Day, instead of taking her to a restaurant, because I thought people wouldn't make too much show, so I invited her home for a 5-course meal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but they are still alive.
They're still alive, and you started school in Kwesi. I want to get a bit about primary education, what do you remember of it, and also secondary education. So, Doc, did you start school in Kwesi?
No,
you didn't.
I started school at Akimodan, where my father was a senior housemaster at the secondary school, eventually assistant headmaster. Then we moved to Cape Coast.
Okay.
Where I went to University Primary and then continued to Infantsman School for 7 years.
Oh, I see.
From 75 to 82.
During Shekan?
Yeah, during Shekan. Probably, I think that is what has also contributed to my attitude to knowledge generation. That probably some of it might not be appreciated right now, but I think we've got to have long-term vision. Right. Leadership is about vision and it's about a determination. And I think that is what drives the Kwesi Aning Center. I mean, there is a leadership that seeks to ensure that we prepare for the future in terms of understanding the context within which countries collapse, within which we need to send peace support operators. And that is why probably you may have heard that we've now added an academic wing to what we do.
Okay.
And I think for me, that is visionary leadership, you know, thinking way ahead before the problems arise. Talking
about that, you do a lot of security analysis, and in that you talk about really major issues. You talk about armed robbery, it's one of the matters and all of that. Does that make your work dangerous? Are you sometimes, do you find yourself in the theater of not war, of course we don't have conflict, but really in the theater of fire, so to speak?
Sure, yeah.
In what form?
First, in the form of abuse. I mean, abuse that is so base and so primitive that you wonder whether this is the same people in the same country who perceive themselves as religious, as hospitable, as welcoming.
All right.
Then there are all the anonymous one-off text messages, the calls. So I don't have a landline in my house because it's always possible to trace those calls. But when your phone is on silent and you don't recognize the number, you can refuse to take it.
Right.
Occasionally you get, sort of fairly indecent emails. But I think over all these years, I've learned to take a protective action. So.
But what do they say to you? What do these calls say? What do these emails say? What's their beef, so to speak?
I think most people feel that when you give a statement that is critical of an individual or an institution from which they get something to eat small, that you are threatening their livelihoods. So more often than not, yes, then they will call you or send you a text message or an email.
Threatening you?
Yeah, to try and warn you off, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
To kill you, to maim you, to harm you?
Yeah, all of that.
All of that?
All of that. So as you notice, since September last year, I've not done too many interviews.
Right.
Because, of course, my parents are old and that gets to them very quickly.
Okay.
My mother in particular will call me wherever I am when I've given an interview, and there are all these spin-offs and people are also insulting your parents on top, to ask me to consider whether it's that important. And I remember a clear case sometime last year where my father actually came to me very early in the morning and said, look, if you are to die, the only people who will mourn are your siblings and us. So probably you might want to consider. So I've taken a bit of a step back. Now now I do more with the BBC than with local stations because I think it's become a little too dangerous. And I'll come back onto the scene post the elections sometime in March next year.
What will change post the elections?
Oh, I think the contentions would have died down. We would have identified a victor, a new government would be in place, and I think I should be able to contribute by advising that government. Right now, I think because of the allure of whoever wins power for this year, issues have been quite swept under the carpet, and is the abuse that comes through. And I've said this several times. A random sampling of the newspapers will show you, or the radio, about the seriousness of the abusive language, and that distorts the picture so much so that I think it's important that some of us do take a step back.
Doc, as we celebrate or commemorate AU Day today, I mean, we all should be looking at issues of the African Union. I remember back in school, A-levels, every day we had to write some kind of an essay about whether the OAU, Organization of African Unity, is now a white elephant or not. And it was a serial examination question, so to speak, and all of that. Yeah. But really, the question is, the AU, what difference has it really made in terms of impact? Yeah. Certain things may have changed, the bodies may have changed, the way in which things are done may have changed, but really, look at Libya. They say we didn't show our strength, as you have just said yourself. Look at what happened to Gaddafi. Look at the Arab Spring. Let's talk about everything else. Where is the AU? It's always the US or the EU or some other body out there. What's happening to us? Do we still need the AU anyway?
I think you are being very naughty. This is a this is one hell of a tough question, particularly for somebody who has worked within the AU. I do share your concern, and I do share your worry about the empirical efficacy of the African Union. Right. But let me go back to a point that you made as to whether the OAU had become or became a white elephant. Right. I think the OAU was a success. Okay. The OAU was formed to achieve 3 or 4 things. First, to end apartheid, which it did. To end colonialism, which it did on the African continent. To ensure that the borders that we inherited at independence were held intact. Right. Not to open a Pandora's box of wars. Okay. After the achievement of these 3 core objectives, Africa and the world had changed. Okay. Conflicts had become a key issue. Economic development, Africa was left behind. There was a youth bulge. Environment had come onto the scene. That's right. The OAU's leaders were slow on the uptake. And therefore, there was a certain sense that the organization was not responding to the challenges that related to people's daily lives and lived experiences. Okay. The AU was then established. But the AU, let me be very frank, has still not 10 years on not managed to fulfill the optimisms of its establishment days. Right. Nevertheless, there are several aspects of the AU protocol, particularly the protocol establishing the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, that I think, and then the Constitutive Act, that I think we can highlight. Okay. Article 4H in particular talks about the right of the African Union to intervene in member states. Right. Now, this is a very radical shift from the non-intervention clauses of the earlier years. Absolutely. 2 is that the African Union has put on the agenda the issue of the responsibility to protect. That is the African state's responsibility to protect its citizens. First, the state must prevent genocide. Right. It must prevent inhuman treatment. It must prevent ethnic cleansing. States that are unable or unwilling or incapable of doing this would then be sanctioned. So there are particular norms and values that are beginning to appear on the agenda. And here, let me highlight the leadership provided by Ghana, both in the United Nations and under African Union, particularly when Nana Nado was the chair of the Executive Council. I mean, he was the one who promoted and pushed what eventually became known as the Ezewini Consensus, the African position and acceptance of the fact that the state has a responsibility. That Ghana as a state cannot say, well, we are not wealthy enough and therefore we cannot protect our citizens. It is incumbent on all states to protect. The second point that I want to highlight with respect to the AU is the principle of the protection of civilians in conflict. That the AU now makes it as one of its core mandates that in every conflict situation, those troops who are inserted must first and foremost protect non-combatant civilians. So I think there are gradual norms that are beginning to be exerted, but this continent is really huge. There are different forms of government, democratic, non-democratic, democratizing, and the response mechanism to the policies emanating from the AU are not always as positive as we would want. Now that comes back to our earlier conversation about leadership. I think in this country, and particularly also because of ECOWAS, that we are beginning to get a type of political leadership in West Africa that is more tolerant, that is more open to contending and conflicting views, and that makes ECOWAS a little bit ahead of the other groups. And talking about ECOWAS, let me highlight the leadership provided by Dr. Chambers, particularly, who elevated this institution to such a height that it's a problem now. But hopefully we will overcome the lacuna that we have experienced.
By problem, you mean that it's not easy to maintain it at the standard that he raised it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, he sets such a high bar. And if you talk to partners and you talk to those who study ECOWAS, I think we are beginning to experience a rather low point.
I see. So, really, do we need to worry about our continent, about our country, about our AU today? Do we? I mean, where do we stand? How much control do we have? Our natural resources are an issue. We have no control over it, so to speak, in effect and in practice, and all of that, empirically, so to speak. What's happening in Liberia and in Libya now? Who is actually in control of all the petroleum resources? What's happening in Angola, in Nigeria, etc.? Who actually has control over it? The River Noon and all of those places, Shell is dredging it, and you ask yourself, what happened to our great river Niger? Because now it's parted into two, and one of them is the Noon, and it has Shell activity there and all of that. Where are we? Where do we stand? You talk about the African PhD who is not writing and just says he has a PhD. Question is, how much regard do you have, even if your PhD is from within Africa or within Ghana? It has to come from the West. Where do we stand? Where is our strength?
Oh, I think there's no doubt. I mean, you remember that the University of Ghana under Professor Aite, I think, the recently appointed Vice Chancellor, has transformed PhD study. I think part of the challenge with churning out so many people with MAs and BAs and all that kind of thing, it is the applicability of the knowledge. So what we are doing, if I take the Kofi Annan Center, for example, is that we are not just churning out people who have an MA in conflict, peace and security or gender, peace and security, but we are churning out people whom we've educated to be able to apply the theory to empirical challenges. So that it is not just about me standing there who is a non-soldier or a non-practitioner talking, but there will always be two people, a theoretician and a practitioner. The trick is for the two of us having different perspectives to be able to present to a class 90% of whom themselves are practitioners, the empirical applicability of what we are teaching. So we've got to make the education that we provide useful. That education should be able to explain. Look, I'm not interested in training people in security analysis so that they will be able to analyze nuclear deterrence. Because that is not what worries me. What worries us, our real nuclear challenge, in inverted commas, is small arms. our veritable challenge is narcotics and its impact on governance, processes, and institutions. Yet another challenge is the rising piracy economies in the Gulf of Guinea. So we are trying to educate people so that with the skill sets that we provide, they'll be able to answer the tough questions of today and hopefully use that education to improve lives. I think for a long time there's been a disconnect between the kind of training people were giving and the needs of industry. Okay, we are trying to match or break that gap.
So that's what we need to do. But talking about narcotics, really, it has been an issue in Ghana for a long time. Small arms is a major issue. We have a whole secretariat now and all that. We attend a lot of conferences there. Every time, people are out there doing some discussing what we should do. Do those things affect the local terrain? Do those affect the people in the Volta region who are still making those pesos? Do they affect the people who come, because we have porous borders, are able to bring in and take out? That's what we do. What about the narcotics thing? They say that we tried something at the airport, the West Bridge operation, all of that. Has the scene changed in 2012?
No.
It hasn't.
Will it change? No.
That was my next question.
I think we have a wrong approach to it. The greatest challenge to our democracy is narcotics.
Okay.
It transforms lives. We seem to accept the monetary spin-offs that comes. Villages and towns look up to those who have gone and come back and conquered, and they are given titles.
Absolutely.
We've just started, or actually completing a major study on public perceptions and community perceptions of the spin-offs of the narcotics trade. I won't mention names here, but some of my researchers went to particular towns, and there was praise and glorification of the trade.
We are told that they are the role models in certain communities in Ghana, particularly in Accra. In fact, the little children tell people...
We went... Every region in this country sees those who traffic narcotics as brave people.
I had little children, 7, 8. What do you want to become like? They say X because he's and they know what he does.
Yeah, of course, yes. I mean, we verified this just about 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Across the country, across Ghana. I'm going up to Eastern and Ashanti very soon to interview prisoners, particularly those who are now in prison with relation to drugs. And in other regions, when the interviews were done, I mean, they've got absolutely no regrets because they know that their wealth is out there waiting for them. Look, until we have a bipartisan national approach to understand the extent of the problem, the way that the two states that we have, the traditional state and the Ghanaian state, because they don't fit evenly and naturally, leaves cracks that are exploited by those who engage in this trade. It's going to grow. But let me also say this, and whenever I travel around the world and I say this, people say, oh, Kwesi, you are too optimistic. You are not looking at the problematic well. We will not experience a Mexico here because already there are fairly entrenched conflict resolution mechanisms amongst those who engage in this trade, dealing with market access, market share, quality, sale points, and all that. Whenever there's the possibility of a contentious issue, they'll sit down, negotiate around it. And so we must recognize that we are in for the very long haul. Unfortunately, that recognition is not there.
Terrible, but I hope we do find it. Would you consider mainline political activity?
Myself?
Yes, you.
No.
Why not?
I look forward in the next 5 years or so retiring to Elmina and teaching at the University of Cape Coast. Putting my feet up with Regina and sailing a little bit, fishing, and then traveling around the world and attending our garden.
The no was so sure, it was so emphatic.
It's very emphatic.
How come?
Because I don't want to be disrespected. I think I've worked too hard for what I would have achieved in 5 years' time, and I want peace of mind to enjoy my life and my wife.
Do you have hope for Ghana through the political arrangements that we have?
I think we need to strengthen the private sector. When the private sector becomes strong, politicians will not talk and behave the way they do without thinking about the impact of their words on the economic side. Right now, because the private sector is small and weak, politicians just say things that they want. I mean, if I were to bring you some of the studies that we've been doing and the words that come out of the mouths of politicians, I mean, you will weep for being a Ghanaian. But my argument is that there is still hope. As the economy expands and our local businesses expand and grow stronger, there will be this meeting of minds between politics and economics, in which politicians particularly will have to speak in ways that A, attracts businesses and more money into Ghana, two, creates opportunities for Ghanaian industry to go out there, and three, actually to deepen and expand and create wealth in this country. I think that that fit is not there yet, but definitely not. I will never consider politics.
For the future, again, as you speak about it, you also have to think about human resource base. You've been around the world. You've been to New York University and Bora Bay in Sierra Leone. I mean, talking about local terrain, Denmark, etc. How does the Ghanaian graduate compare?
Poorly.
Poorly?
I am an external examiner at Bora Bay University.
In Sierra Leone?
In Sierra Leone. I mark dissertations from South Africa. I'm going... last year, I was head of an international panel to examine the quality first of the teaching and student work at the Political Science Department of the University of Pretoria. And I've done this for almost about 15 or 20 universities around the world. I think the Ghanaian student compares extremely poorly, probably last.
Wow.
Last year, when I did a random sampling of my BA students from Bora Bay University from the Conflict and Peace Studies Department, MA students in Ghana will not compare in terms of their ability to do the literature review, the methodology section, and apply those to the empirical discourse. No MA student that have marked a dissertation in the last 13 years in Ghana. Only one person have I ever given an A.
That's terrible. But somehow we have to bring the show to a close. I look forward to another day where we can invite you and have a general discussion.
I'll be very happy to come back.
Thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure.